Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this very timely talk. Rowena and I are honored to have Dr. Siamdoust and Dr. Assef Ashraf with us to talk about the academic job market during the COVID pandemic. It has been a doozy, hasn't it? So welcome. I will first begin by giving a brief bio of our speakers and then get the conversation going. So today we have Dr. Siamdoust, who is an assistant professor of Middle East and Media Studies at the University of Texas at Austin. Prior to her current position, Dr. Siamdoust was a visiting assistant professor on women's studies and anthropology of religion at Harvard University and a postdoctoral associate in the Yale program in Iranian Studies at the Council on Middle East Studies in the Macmillan Center for International and Area Studies. She was the inaugural Ehsan Yarshater Fellow in Iranian Studies. Seriously, an amazing bio. We're so honored to have you here. And next we have Dr. Assef Ashraf, who is an assistant professor in the Eastern Islamic lands and Persian-speaking world at the University of Cambridge and fellow of Pembroke College, Cambridge. Prior to his current position, Dr. Assef Ashraf was a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of History at Bryn Mawr College. It's honestly, I have no words. Incredible to have you here. We're honored to for you to share your experiences with us. And both of you have done postdoctoral studies and then tenure track positions. Your experience will be really, really key to understanding what the job market is looking like. So my opening question for both of you is, how did the COVID pandemic change the academic job market and how did it affect the hiring process? So we want to talk about what universities are looking for in an ideal candidate. Take it away, Dr. Siamdoust.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much to Leila and Rowena for organizing this panel. I think it's crucial within academia that we have a more collegial and collaborative sort of culture. And I think this panel goes a long way toward that. And I kind of wish there was something like this when I was a student, or even, a postgraduate student looking for positions. And I hope that what we can offer, I'll just speak for myself, I hope that what I can offer is actually of value. So first, I just want to kind of start out by reading a quote that was in a New York Review of Books article published last year called Serfs of Academe. And I wonder how many of you may have read this article. But in it, the author, Charles Peterson, writes, "Pursuing a life in academia has become more like trying to become a professional athlete or a star musician than a doctor or even a typical service sector worker." So, I'm not going to be a cheerleader for academia today. I'm going to be as sort of realistic and honest as I can without really being sort of dystopian and discouraging. But I will say that, having switched tracks from journalism to academia, so I had a life for about a decade as a journalist and then did a PhD at Oxford and transferred over into academia. And my route to getting my first tenure track position, which I just started this fall, was quite winding and arduous, I would say, for all kinds of reasons. Initially, I was trying to get a position in a particular area, New York City. So that becomes that's something that you quickly realize you have to throw out the window, which is of course more difficult for people who are perhaps a little more advanced, have families and are rooted in ways that makes it difficult for them to just move anywhere. But anyway, after two postdocs, actually one postdoc and a fellowship at Harvard, here I am. And so the academic job market has changed tremendously, and we all know this. There were hiring freezes across most universities in America and even in England and Australia. And I know May last year, there was a statistic about how something like 400 universities had put hiring freezes in order. And so, that of course affects people who are just coming into the job market, recent PhDs, into a really precarious position because there's so few positions out there, especially I would say in social sciences and the humanities. The picture is a little different in the sciences, but I believe because this is the Association of Iranian Studies, we're really mostly talking about humanities and social sciences. What also happened during that process was that not only were these, young PhDs coming into the market looking for very, competitive, capable PhDs coming into the market, but also there's the whole field of academia has changed. And, due to these sort of neoliberal restructurings that have also affected academia, we now have a informal workforce that does not get the benefits of stability and consistency and other kinds of benefits at these universities, and many of them were laid off. And so those are also experienced teachers who are also part of the pool of people looking for positions. So it's this sort of staggering, I would say staggering odds that people entering the job market are facing. Having said that, we know of cases, especially sort of this fall and late spring of also 2021, they've, some new openings have trickled in. So what are institutions looking for to really address more directly your question? I think in general, we, what the pandemic did to us as a society is just put more value on, I guess, sort of this, immediate, the immediate threat that the pandemic posed to so many of us in terms of real existential threat, really just heightened the importance of work that matters, right? So, coming out of our sort of academic shells and really doing more public facing work, I think that's one thing that I've noticed. The new positions, the new openings that we see, they're more intersectional. They try to address more recent routes of inquiry, whether it's about migration or racism, or just really having these analytical lenses that are really have been sort of developing over the last few years. But I think what institutions are looking for hasn't really changed a whole lot, in that, universities are looking people who have who show a lot of promise in terms of their academic and research work. And toward that, I don't know, Leila John and Rowena John, if I should be speaking to some of my, and I want to give Assef a chance as well, and I don't want to go on too long. I don't know at what point you will ask me for some of my suggestions and recommendations, if I should stop here and then we'll come back to that, or how you think we should proceed.
It's totally up to you. We do have some questions on the nitty gritty of it all, your suggestions on what the proposal and everything should look like in your experience with that as well.
Okay, sure. So I will just sort of wrap it up here and just say that, I think my suggestion, just sort of overall suggestion right now, is a tried and sort of true suggestion of just really applying to as many positions as you can. And on the side, just keeping your research and writing going. I know it can be a challenge. It can be it's a disheartening process when you're trying to find, when you're competing with so many other capable people for those like one or two positions. It's nearly absurd, I think, having also had experience in a different professional field such as journalism. I mean, and it does not, and always just keeping in mind that the process you're going through and the successes and failures you're having, especially the failures that you're having, are not a reflection of your work, that you're really, it's just an extremely competitive field. But, I guess my sort of overall suggestion would be just keep your research and writing going, even if it's for an hour a day, you sit down and you try to put some lines on a paper. So at the end of the day, that's what, the universities are really looking for, that you have, even when you're starting out, some publication in some form, even if it's online or somewhere, but just try to publish something. And I know I can see from the list of attendants that we have a sort of wide range of people joining in this meeting today. So I know we're all at different stages of this process. Over to you, Assef John. Sorry if I went on too long.
Not at all. Should I jump in? Yeah, okay. I mean, I think I'm going to echo much of what Nahid said. I mean, I don't think that there's much really to add to what the current situation in the academic job market is. I think it does bear saying, though, it is important to remind ourselves that the academic job market is diverse in some ways. So the picture in certain disciplines is different than in other disciplines. So I do think that we shouldn't overgeneralize. Iranian studies is a big tent. You know, the job market in Iranian history might be different than the job market in Persian literature. It might be different than in social sciences. So there is some variety depending on the discipline. I would say also that generally speaking, sort of at a general level, the situation in Iranian studies and let's say Middle Eastern studies more broadly is better, I think, than some other fields. I mean, I did my PhD in the history department. I had friends and colleagues who were doing PhDs in, you know, early modern European history, and there were like literally 0 jobs in given years. So there is a little bit of variation depending on discipline and subfield, but I generally agree with Nahid that the situation, the general picture is bleak. It's difficult out there. And I think that a lot of the problems that exist in the academic job market didn't actually begin with the pandemic. They're part of longer term trends, and they're related to structural issues in academia. I think Nahid touched on some of these already. You know, things like the casualization of the academic labor force. There are more and more fixed term, non-tenure track positions. There are more and more kind of short-term jobs that are asking you to do a lot more teaching rather than research on short-term contracts. There are more PhDs than there are jobs, so there's a backlog of graduates, PhD graduates, and these problems have been brewing, I mean, for decades. They're not new, and if anything, the 2008 financial crisis really kind of exacerbated those problems. And then the pandemic came along and compounded it even further. So I think what the pandemic has done has kind of compounded problems that had been brewing for some time and had been growing for some time. As Nahid mentioned, there were hiring freezes during the pandemic, which made the problem of having this backlog of people who had finished their PhDs and were looking for more permanent or better jobs worse. There are more and more people looking for jobs. There's still the problem of not enough permanent or tenure track jobs. So the job market is extremely competitive. I think a lot of recent PhDs end up taking kind of postdoctoral positions or fixed term contracts, what we would call in the US kind of visiting assistant professorships. Here in the UK, they're called fixed term contracts. Even in that sector of the market, which is, you know, these are not like excellent jobs, it's becoming competitive. So there's no point in sugarcoating it. I mean, I think it's better to be aware of these realities that we all face, and the realities of the kind of the academic world than to not be aware of it. With that said, and you know, I don't want to end kind of completely on a downer. I do want to just say that I personally believe that it doesn't help to get discouraged. It is a difficult picture out there, but at the same time, academia does need younger people. Academia needs more people from diverse backgrounds. Dire need of diversity in academia, whether that's in terms of gender, whether that's in terms of race, whether that's in terms of class background. So we need more people from different backgrounds throwing their hat in the ring and trying to get jobs. And I think it helps to be persistent. I think it helps to work hard, publish if you can publish, get teaching experience if you can get teaching experience, be kind, be persistent. None of these things guarantee you a job, but they don't hurt. I think I have a few kind of more specific suggestions that I can make, but I'd like to just hold off on those for now and pause, and then we can kind of take the conversation in different directions.
Thank you. I'll just take over briefly from here, but it's great to have you both. And Nahid and Assef, I've known you both and I've looked up to you both for some time now. So it's really nice that you're sharing your experiences and your guidance with all of us. So thank you. I just wanted to remind all the attendees that if you do have any questions, please do write in the chat box or the Q&A box, and we'll get to them as we go along. But I have another question for both of you, really, and that's just to ask about what your actual experience was. I mean, I've heard people putting in 100 applications and getting one, but perhaps if you're willing to share, what exactly was your experience before you got to your current positions? Perhaps Nahid, you could start first, and then Assef.
Sure, Rowena, thank you for your kind words. So my actual experience, I think my trajectory is in some ways not representative of, and perhaps it is because, you know, people coming into it is a very sort of, you know, not everybody has a very consistent path in academia. And mine was, I did a doctorate in England and then moved to New York a year later. So I was teaching at Oxford for a year as a, you know, sort of adjunct. And then moved to New York with my family and was really trying to find a position in New York. And something permanent, I didn't actually, so I was applying very selectively, and at the same time teaching as an adjunct at the NYU Department of Media, Culture and Communication, NYU's Department of Media, Culture and Communication. So while I was teaching as an adjunct for several years, I was also applying for positions, but being quite selective and trying to get positions in New York City, basically. And they were far and few in between. And in my particular case, I should also mention, because I have a doctorate in Middle Eastern studies, as opposed to Assef, for example, whose doctorate is in history, there was this added, not only was I coming from the UK, so the academic structures that, or you know, the mentors and all of, you know, I wasn't really US based, so I was coming into the US, but also I was coming from an area studies background, and I think there's an added level of sort of challenge when you don't come, especially within US academia, when you don't come from within a disciplinary department, and so Middle East studies is being regarded as area studies. It makes it a little, you're in some ways more flexible to apply to, depending on the actual work that you do, you're more flexible to apply to all kinds of positions. But you're also limited in that if you are applying for a position in anthropology, a lot of my work is anthropological, you know, anthropology departments will necessarily always prefer a candidate who has a PhD in anthropology as opposed to Middle Eastern studies and is trained by an anthropologist and does anthropological work. You know, you're still disadvantaged, at least within the US, less so in the UK, but I will let Assef comment on that. I believe those disciplinary boundaries might be a little less sort of stark in the UK. So, you know, after a couple of years of doing, and then doing the adjunct, I did get a position, the postdoctoral position at Yale in Iranian studies, and it was the first year that it was starting there. And so I really counted myself quite lucky to get that, because at that point I knew that there are few positions within the geographic sort of area that I could really do. And so after that, and I didn't send out, I will say this is probably a mistake or just my life condition and context, but ultimately what I learned is that and I should have throughout all these years, because it did take me quite a few years to get my first tenure track position. I got my PhD in 2013 and I got the first position in 2020. So that is, and then I delayed by a year because I was doing my fellowship at Harvard. But so ultimately it really did take me applying more widely and just applying to any positions that I qualified for. But of course, I started doing that right at the beginning of right before the pandemic started. And so that had its own challenges, but I'll set that aside for now. But I think, you know, what I would recommend is that, and I've met other people in academia who, let's say, have a doctorate in history, but ended up getting the one position in sociology, doing work on Middle Eastern studies. So I would say, don't be too conservative. If you are not bound geographically, do apply to as many positions. If you're not sure whether you should apply to a position, it doesn't hurt, just apply. You never know, because there are just so many factors that play into whether or not you will be considered for a position. A lot of it has to do with the needs and requirements of that institution and the kind of candidate that they're looking for. Some of it kind of percolates in the, politics and dynamics of the committee members and the sort of, the relations that they have, and, all kinds of sort of human factors come into this process as well, which is why I was saying, there are factors that will be out of your hand. And but I guess my one recommendation would be, do not what I did, which was be very selective about the positions that I applied to, because if you apply to 2 positions or 3 positions, it's going to be very tough. And I think everybody on this chat probably already know this, apply to as many as you can. And even, stretch the boundaries of the disciplines when you do that, because a lot of institutions now are looking for people who do cross-disciplinary or interdisciplinary work. And if you think your work really fits within the frame of a position in a different discipline, but you're already kind of doing that work, although your disciplinary background is different, just go ahead and apply. Nobody limits how many applications you can send in. And I know you asked me, Romana, about my very personal experience, but basically, after I was intentionally hoping to get a postdoctoral position as opposed to a tenure track position, because I was hoping to do more research and writing before I start a teaching position.
Thank you, Nahid. And maybe Assef now?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think broadly speaking, my experience was similar to Nahid's in that it took me a few years to land a permanent position, a tenure track position. In terms of my own personal trajectory, I finished the PhD in 2016, and actually my first job was as an adjunct at a small public university in Connecticut. It was kind of a 1-year contract. It had a heavy teaching load. And I really kind of cut my teeth as far as the teaching is concerned in that 1 year. And then after that, I got the 2-year postdoc at Bryn Mawr, which was also teaching postdoc. There was a little bit of teaching that was expected with that position, much lighter than the position that I had before. But it did give me a little bit of time and space to publish, to do research and publish. And then I was appointed to the position at Cambridge in 2018, and I started here in the fall of 2018. So it took me a couple of years. It took me a few years to get kind of the tenure track position, and I don't think that that's unusual. I think it is becoming more and more the norm for people to kind of bounce around, as it were, for a couple of years before they end up with a tenure track position. I mean, there are people who get tenure track positions straight out of a PhD program, but I'm not sure that's the norm anymore. Maybe it is. I don't actually know the numbers. But I guess sort of to maybe kind of move away from my own personal experience and then kind of just try to frame it as what kind of lessons I drew and maybe what lessons would be useful for our attendees today. I mean, I think one of the things that I drew away from that whole experience was what I said earlier about being persistent. And I think this kind of goes along with what Nahid was saying. Apply to a lot of jobs. I mean, I applied to a lot of jobs. I applied to everything that I thought I was eligible for or had broadly the relevant experience for, whether that was postdoctoral positions, whether it was visiting assistant professorships or kind of fixed term contract positions, or whether it was tenure track positions. I applied widely. I applied, I didn't have a family, so I was a little bit more flexible in where I could go, and I applied into positions in the US, in Canada, in the UK, France, So I personally took kind of a kind of a wide approach in terms of where I want to apply. And the other thing that I think I took away from that whole experience was that I do think it's important to focus on what you can control. You can't control what jobs open up in any particular year. You can't control who is on the selection committee, on the search committee. You can't control what that committee is looking for in the position. What you can control, first and foremost, is finishing your dissertation, and having a done dissertation makes you much more marketable on the job market than being ABD. You know, basically being finished with a PhD but not having done the dissertation yet. So finish the dissertation. Publications, if you can publish, that helps enormously on the job market. And I would say, in my opinion, try to publish peer-reviewed articles in journals if you can. I mean, I guess it depends on the discipline a little bit. Different disciplines have different expectations, but at least in history, I can tell you that there is a kind of a hierarchy of publications, and with a monograph being kind of the best thing you can publish. And then it would be, I think, peer-reviewed articles in journals, and different journals have different reputations. And so strive to publish in kind of prestigious, let's say, for lack of a better word, venues. Publications is another important element. And then if you can, and I think this is especially important for tenure track positions, permanent positions, is teaching experience. If you can get teaching experience in some shape or form, I think that would benefit you on the job market. Yeah, so focus on the things that you can actually control, and then, you know, put your application in, put your best foot forward, make a case for why you would be the best candidate for that position, and then see where the chips may fall. There's not much else you can do, really.
Thank you so much to you both. This has been truly eye-opening and essential to know. I want to ask another question, which gets us a little bit even more broad. Can perhaps, Nahid, can you say a few words about the different types of positions out there? Lectureships, adjuncts, tenure track, teaching colleges, liberal arts colleges, research one institutions. I know this is not too Iranian studies centric, but what's out there? What are we looking at?
Sure. I want to just add one thing to what Assef just said, which is, you know, he mentioned everything to do. And the only thing I would add is have a plan B. Have a plan B as well. You know, it doesn't hurt to just have an eye on what else you could be doing. And I know with the amount of knowledge and expertise that we all have here, you know, as having gone through a PhD, there are other things that you can do. So just always keep that in mind. You know, there might be other, you know, whether it's a think tank or part of a nonprofit or whatever it is, something creative, whatever it is, just keep sort of thinking about that plan B and nurture it a little bit, you know, just while you're on this track trying to get an academic position. As far as the different, you know, well, so there's, you know, we already talked about the postdoctoral route. If you can get a postdoctoral fellowship at an institution, they always come with some teachings. As far as I know, none of them come. So for example, for Yale and Harvard, both of them I had to teach one semester out of each year. And it was only one course, which, you know, most tenure track positions and R1 universities require you to teach 2 courses per semester. So just 1 course a year is really a very light load and gives you time to do other work. So, you know, there are these postdoctoral positions, there are lectureships that are fixed term, limited, let's say a 2-year position of a lectureship. And a lectureship is really depends from institution to institution. In some, it is really just an adjunct position where you're not getting any benefits. In others, it does come with some benefits, whether it's healthcare or some kind of you know, connection into the university support system for getting grants and research money and all of that. There are visiting professorships for which all of you with a PhD qualify. So you don't have to already be a professor somewhere to apply to these visiting professorships. So those are usually 1, sometimes 2-year visiting professorships for which you can apply. Obviously, the tenure track position, that's sort of the, the holy grail of, the positions that we all try to get, so that we have some, some permanency to the work that we do, and a bit of, sort of peace of mind to pursue our research. And there's also another thing that, another position that I'm sure Assef can think perhaps of some others too, but also look into, fellowships and grants that allow you or give you a year or a semester worth of money to do your own research and writing. So for example, ACLS, I know as of last year, I think because of the pandemic, started this fellowship called Emerging Voices, and this is specifically for recent PhDs. So you get a chunk of money and you get a fellowship, and you are not even necessarily associated with the university, but you get that money in order to, a lot of these grants and fellowships require you to have some kind of affiliation with a university, but usually when you bring your own money, no university will say no to that. So if you are able to get a grant or a fellowship, you can always get in touch with a professor or someone at any institution whose work is close to the kind of work that you do, and ask them if you could be affiliated with their institution as a visiting scholar while bringing your own money to do this work. It's always good to have some kind of institutional affiliation. You get all kinds of, for one thing, you look more legit, people will respond to your emails more promptly. So if you can get an institutional affiliation, even while you have some grant money or fellowship, do that. Try to have, that university email that just gives you a more official sort of, standing. And I think that's all I can think of as far as the positions that are out there.
Thank you so much, Nahid Jan. It's funny when you said about Plan B, I was thinking I could make a good coffee from time to time. So, so you never know. You never know what the future holds.
It could be a coffee shop that
you never know.
with Persian poetry, and I mean, where you bring in speakers, and I mean, it could be an amazing, more fulfilling project.
It's true, and then well, I invite all of you. We'll have talks.
Perfect.
Circle. Very nice. You never know. That's actually a really good plan B. Oh gosh, and no, and thank you. And in some ways, I suppose what you said about the fellowships that have come out, I suppose that's a positive side to the pandemic on the academic job market, which is, I suppose, nice. If we had to think of something that was positive about the impact of the pandemic. But perhaps we could ask Assef Jan a question about the application itself, in terms of, I know each position has a different application process, but usually you'd have to write things like, what is your contribution or impact section? What are your tips about that? And then about what's the difference between a research statement, a teaching statement? Are they usually the same thing? How would you approach that? And it's slightly related, and that is this question of what's trendy as well. And this is something that I've kind of struggled with, different, last year I remember in the UK with BLM, you got a lot more interest in Black history positions, and all of that. So, how do we weave that into our own research, and should we do that? Should we, what's best?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that second one is a tough question. I'm gonna have to think about that a little bit, but
no worries.
In terms of the material that you have to submit for as part of your application, I mean, as you said, it really kind of depends on the job. Different jobs will ask you for different documents and different sets of material. Usually, at the very least, what they'll ask you for is obviously your CV, a cover letter, and a writing sample. And then how much writing, what length that writing sample should be, might also vary. But that's at the bare minimum, I would say those three things are kind of always, oh, and letters of reference. I mean, letters of reference is the other big component. But then, as you pointed out, Rowena, there are these other things that sometimes search committees ask for, like a research statement, like a teaching statement. Sometimes some jobs will ask for a diversity statement. There may be other things that search committees are now asking for. Those are the things that I can recall at this moment having seen. And they are all different from one another, but obviously there's a little bit of overlap too. Your cover letter is basically an opportunity for you to introduce yourself to the search committee, and that includes, introducing who you are, but obviously your research, your experience, whether that's teaching experience or other kinds of professional experience with regard to service to the field. So things like what you guys are doing and organizing panels like this, these kinds of things. And then maybe, you would also perhaps include some information in the cover letter about what you can bring to the job that you're applying for, what you can offer the department that you are applying to in terms of your teaching, in terms of your research, how you fit with the department that you are applying to. I think those are broadly kind of the various kind of points that you have to hit in a cover letter. And then in your research statement and your teaching statement, you would then kind of essentially kind of expand on the research bit of your cover letter. So whatever you wrote in your cover letter about your research, in the research statement, that would be your opportunity to expand on that and to go into a little bit more detail about your research, and not just what your research is, but what its value is. And I guess there are different ways to measure the value of research. I think one of the main ways is its scholarly value. What intervention is your work making in the relevant scholarship? What is it? What kinds of work and what fields and what bodies of literature is your work engaging with? Is it revising? Is it changing the paradigm? I mean, I don't know, use whatever verb you want to use. What is your intervention, the scholarly intervention of your work? But there may be other ways to think about the value of your work, whether it's the social value of your work, the political value of your work. That's an opportunity for you to expand on that in your research statement. And then the teaching statement is an opportunity for you to tell the department about your teaching experience and what it is that you've done, what courses you've taught, whether you've supervised graduate students, in what capacity have you supervised graduate students, master's students, PhD students, and then maybe also try to link it to the department that you're applying to. How you should try to. I think I would suggest that in the teaching statement, you should try to demonstrate how your experience would fit, or what your skills, your teaching skills are, how that would fit kind of what the job application actually is asking for, but also based on what the department offers, the curriculum in the department and in the university. So you would have to do a little bit of research to see kind of what courses are offered in that department and in that university. And then the diversity statement. Sometimes some jobs ask for diversity statements. That's always kind of a more difficult one to. I mean, I think that's a little bit more open to interpretation as to how you define diversity and what you take away from that word diversity, and what it is that you think you bring that's diverse to the department and to the university. So I think there's a little bit more room for interpretation on that document. And not all jobs ask for a diversity statement, although some do. So I think those are the, did I touch
Yeah,
on
yeah,
the
that was
documentation?
great. That was
Yeah.
great. And about the trendy,
Yeah,
trendy. Yeah,
trends. Yeah,
maybe
yeah, yeah.
even Nahid could also add if you have any thoughts
Yeah, maybe
about
I'm
that.
going to let Nahid take the first step,
But both of you, it would be great.
or I can. I mean, I can take a stab too. I guess I would say, yeah. I mean, I guess I think one part of your question was whether trends should influence your own research.
Yeah.
And that one, I have to say, I'm a little bit skeptical of. I think you should do research on what interests you, because at the end of the day, it's your project, and you're going to have to go on the job market and sell that project, and make a case for why you are doing that project. So I would be hesitant to suggest or to recommend that you allow trends to dictate what your project is. On the other hand, what I would say is that you should be aware of trends and be able to speak competently about how your work engages with some trend. Not that you should, I don't think that you should make outrageous claims. Make sure that your claims are kind of grounded in what you're actually doing. But be prepared to speak about how your work is engaging with some kind of bigger topic, some emerging new field that is gaining a lot of attention and a lot of kind of scholarship. Just be aware of what's kind of going on out there. So in that sense, maybe it's not so much that will determine what your work is about, but it will maybe determine how you speak about your work and how you frame your work and how you kind of pitch your work, as it were. And then the other thing I would say is that kind of more directly related to the job market, there are jobs, and I think particularly postdoctoral fellowships, that sometimes are kind of framed in a way that's very much based on trends. Like, to give you kind of a concrete example, I've seen postdoctoral fellowships where the discipline is open, the geographic region of expertise is open, the time period is open, but what they're interested in is work that engages with the concept of space, or something like, they'll say, space, that's the theme for this year's postdoctoral, and then you have to come along and say, well, hang on, does my research have anything to do with space? I think maybe it does. And then you have to kind of explain how your work has something to do with space. So there are these kinds of positions that appear, and I think it's more common with postdoctoral fellowships, but maybe with tenure track positions too, that are kind of obviously shaped by kind of trends that are going on in academia. And again, you need to be prepared to frame your project in ways that speak meaningfully to those concepts or kind of terms of analysis. And I think the key is it needs to speak meaningfully. You can't make, I mean, if you make kind of outrageous claims, the selection committee will probably see that you're making kind of outrageous claims. So, there is a limit to how you can reframe or restructure or pitch your project, but you should be aware of what some of these trends are and be prepared to speak about them. I hope that kind of addressed the question.
It was perfect. Thank you so much. And we have a wonderful, wonderful question, but I first wanted to give the floor to Nahid to say a few words, if you have, on the same question, the process, the trendiness, what goes into the application.
I feel like Assef just put it perfectly. You can't really, you should be doing the research that you're doing, but you should be aware of the value of your research. So I think, if anything, sort of trying to plug into some of these trends or bigger questions is really an opportunity for all of us to consider the value and relevance of our work, right? So I think it's a really good exercise in and of itself to try to figure out, there are huge migration goals. There's a real reckoning with racism all around the world. There's climate change. There are all these changes happening around the world and coming, on the sort of foot of the pandemic. There are all these questions about inequity and all, so being social scientists and humanists, we really should consider, well, our work should matter and plug into some of these larger questions that humanity has, sort of plotting our path forward. And so while you can't really stretch and make outrageous claims, it's a good exercise for all of us to just kind of consider those trends and how we might be able to contribute to answering some of those bigger questions. But I think Assef just put it pretty perfectly.
Amazing. Seriously, tremendous tip. Love it. So we go to Armin Yaveri's question. There's like 2 or 3 questions in one question. So Armin asks Assef, is there a rough number of articles an aspiring academic should aim for as a minimum bar? And where do book chapters and book reviews appear on that scale? And then in continuation, on Nahid's point on public engagement, can she give an insight into the particular types of activity which is an automatic tick and others steer from? I know you said public facing work has been a little bit more valued, but I recently heard from University of Toronto that they don't really value, they say like, how do we quantify the value of NGO and community work, which really really made me mad. And in terms of prizes, do these matter much on a CV at this stage? And if so, are they judged purely on monetary value? So this can be addressed to either of you.
So should I start then? So the question was about publications and how many publications you need, I guess, to go on the job market. Is that, did I understand that correctly? And then how do book reviews and book chapters and edited volumes kind of fit in that hierarchy? Is it okay? In terms of minimum number of publications, I would kind of hesitate to give a fixed number. I don't think that there is a minimum number. And in some ways, maybe it's not even a requirement to get a job to have publications. I just think it helps to have publications and to show search committees, especially I think for permanent jobs, tenure track jobs, that you have a record of publishing and publishing research that has been peer reviewed, that other scholars have read and they have deemed worthy of being published. So as much as possible, if you can do that, that's to your benefit. But I really don't think that there's a minimum number. Just, I guess, try to demonstrate in some way that you are either going to publish, like you have things in the pipeline that are going to be published, or that you do have published. As to the second part of the question, there are different kinds of publications, and all publications are valuable. I think it's fair to say that anything that's been published in a kind of a peer-reviewed venue is valuable. And even I think recently, it's even things like kind of e-journals and there are these kind of more scholarly like blogs and websites that I think sometimes do have their own kind of review processes in place. Those kinds of venues, sometimes those kinds of spaces are perfectly kind of legitimate and respected places to publish articles and essays and kind of other kinds of work as well. So I think the kinds of venues that one could publish in and the kinds of publications has perhaps diversified in over the past few years. And as I also said, I think it really kind of varies discipline by discipline, kind of what is valued more as far as the hierarchy is concerned. I can only speak on behalf of kind of history, or like the discipline of history. And from my understanding and my experience, I would say that monographs, single authored monographs, are kind of at the top. And then peer-reviewed journals peer-reviewed articles in journals is probably second. And the more prestigious the journal, the more it's valued. And what makes a journal more prestigious than others? I mean, that's kind of a fuzzy question. I don't really know the answer to that question, but there are some journals that are just considered more prestigious than others, and so as much as possible, try to publish in those journals in your field. I would say then after the journal articles, then that's where the book chapters come. It's maybe neck and neck, but I think journal articles are kind of valued a little bit higher than book chapters, and then book reviews are kind of, I would say, I mean, at the bottom of the rung. They're perfectly good to do. I mean, you should publish book reviews, but they're not worth as much as an article, as a research article, and certainly not as much as a book. But book reviews are a good way to, like, dip your toe into the publishing world. It was the first thing I ever published was a book review. It gives you a little bit of insight into how journals work. So it is a good way to begin kind of publishing, but as much as possible, I would encourage people to move beyond that and start publishing research, and publish research in peer-reviewed publications. I think that answers it.
That's great, very, very useful, and I've personally found book reviews a very good exercise. I mean, for me, just learning how to read books more critically as well, and so they are really good opportunities. I just wanted to add that, but perhaps we could go back to that question for Nahid, John. Let me, if I can find the question now. Where is it?
Thanks,
I think it was
Rowana.
on public engagement. Yeah, public engagement. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Armin. These are good questions. So on publications, I just wanted to add something to what Assef said, which is, you can publish book chapters in volumes that are peer reviewed and others that aren't. So peer reviewed books, edited volumes are. I would agree that generally sort of book chapters are a little sort of below peer-reviewed journal articles, but still, if you're publishing in an edited volume, I'm putting one together now that's coming to an end and wrapping it up, and we have our chapters peer-reviewed. So that's an important part of the process, and that's something that you can state on your CV when you write that you've published a chapter in a book. You can say, chapter in peer-reviewed edited volume. That makes a big difference to, let's say, an edited volume that's not peer reviewed. On the question about public engagement, I suppose, I heard what Leila said about the University of Toronto, and I think, there is this sort of slight mistrust or snobbery in some ways within academia toward public facing work or public engagement. And my position is very clear on that, in part because I do have a background in journalism, and I just think that, our work, even if it's on something from, the medieval ages, we can always make our work relevant. Because it can, if it doesn't speak to very contemporary and modern themes, it speaks to our history and to all kinds of, issues that matter. And so, I mean, that's our work as scholars. And so, I'm a big believer in, and what's an automatic tick. I would say, if you're working on a subject and you think you can turn part of that material into an op-ed and publish it in a journal, do so. And with a journal, I mean, a newspaper, a magazine. If you can get the Toronto Times, I don't even know if that publication exists. I don't want to sort of aim for the New York Times or Washington Post, sort of the most competitive, but if you can write an op-ed about and make, show the fascinating sort of research that you're doing in an 800 or 900 word opinion piece, do so. I think that matters. I think people see that on a CV and will for the most part consider you as somebody who's really engaged with their topic and interested in making it known to a wider public and starting a conversation on the topic you're researching. So, any kind of opinion piece, if you can be a guest on a podcast series and talk about your research and give insight into your work, podcasts automatically just have many more, consumers, listeners, audience members than textual work. That's just the nature of the medium. People can listen to podcasts while they're doing all kinds of other things, and so podcasts just tend to have many more listeners than journal or newspaper articles, textual work. So podcast is another way, or if you can be part of a, let's say, roundtable at a conference discussing a certain academic topic. I think that's also, roundtables, I think by nature are more public engagement than they are sort of strictly sort of scholarly work. And I don't think there are any works. I mean, I suppose there's this fine line in academia where I can't think of any, or if there are programs for you where you can share your topic and your research with high school students, there are many around. That's another great way of engaging, or high school teachers, not even students, to share your work with high school teachers, high school students. I think that's a great way of engaging the public in your work. I can't think of any to steer from. I suppose, you just don't want to get so engaged in doing that kind of work that you're unable to do your research on your academic and scholarly writing. But, every now and then doing a few, I think is really speaks well for an application.
I have learned so much. I know that we need to end in 3 minutes because Nahijan, you have a class to teach, if I'm not mistaken.
My class actually starts in an hour. I was confused because I thought this starts at 1 p.m. my time, but I think you guys shifted the time back an hour. Am I right?
I have no idea. I know that it's 10 a.m. It's gonna be 10 a.m. here soon.
Okay, good. So I don't have to run just yet.
That's incredible. That's great to hear. But Rowena, do we want to go into? Oh, we've got another question. Do we want to go into final remarks?
Well, we have just the last one about the prizes. We had a final question from Armin Yavari about prizes and whether these matter. I'm sorry about the cat. She probably wants to ask something too, about whether they matter much on the CV at this stage, and if so, are they judged purely on monetary value? So.
I mean, I
don't know. Thank you.
Yeah, I think prizes don't hurt. If you have prizes, that's wonderful. I don't think that they're necessary to get a job. So it's kind of just icing on the cake, as it were. And I'm not even sure that, I mean, I would say that I'm less convinced that the money involved with the prize matters, because I mean, many prizes don't come with money attached to them. It's just purely, or mostly kind of the name of the prize and the association or the society or the organization that grants the prize, I think, is more important than whatever money that comes with it. But I would say, I mean, prizes are nice. They can be a good way to build your name in the field and kind of build a reputation. But I would say that it's not a requirement to land a job.
Honestly, that's great to hear because they're so competitive. I took 2 falls out of my writing to apply to like 10 fellowships. Nothing came about it, which brings me to my other really curiosity, if I should say so, about the diversity statement. I consulted with one of the people who knew about fellowships and stuff, and I pitched my diversity statement as an Iranian first generation migrant, and she was like, Iranians are not that like underserved Can both of you talk a little bit about how to make sense of the diversity statement and tell people, hey, you're in the wrong. Maybe the people who migrated in the 70s were rich.
I can speak to that briefly, but basically, there's this misconception in the US that Iranians and Middle Easterners in general, even though they face such discrimination, not least because Islamophobia and all of that. And I mean, we know this, the history of, US Middle East relations. And so even though they're facing these staggering sort of, challenges and discrimination, they're supposed to be categorized as white. And this is how it is in all census and surveys. And this is the work that Neda Mahmoudeh does in her first book. And I'm kind of, blinking on the title of her book. And she's actually done academic research on the subject. And so I think we just need to be more upfront about it, that our experience as Iranians in the US is in fact quite, is not the same experience that any, person of a European background would have, whether it shows in our sort of visually, physically, or, in our names or our heritage, depending on what sort of level, immigrants we are, whether it's first generation, second generation, whatever it is, 0.5 generation. But I think it's something that you can highlight in your application. You can say, having grown up so and so and having experienced this and this, I'm quite aware on a on a personal level of the kinds of discrimination that exists, and I'm more attuned to diversity and to openness and inclusiveness in my classroom. And just bring in your personal experience. And I think for the most part, if we do come from a Middle Eastern background or other kind of non-European background, we can speak to those issues. And just you're the one who will need to articulate that, regardless of the kinds of misconceptions that exist vis-a-vis your positionality or subjectivity as a Middle Easterner. And the other thing I wanted to say was, I just want to add something to something Assef said before about the documents for an application. There is a thing also called teaching philosophy. A teaching philosophy is not a teaching statement. So just familiarize yourself with what a teaching philosophy is. It's not what institutions are not looking for you in that teaching philosophy to talk about the courses you've taught and your experience. It's really much more about you as an educator. It's a really tricky, it's my least favorite, document to send in. And I had to do it for one application. Least favorite, but most gratifying. Least favorite because it's really hard, because you really have to sort of think about yourself as, who are you and as an educator, and why are you doing this? Why are you an educator? And what are you trying to pass on to your students? And so anyway, if you're asked to write a teaching philosophy, it's not the same as a teaching statement. So just there are resources about it online. So just look into it.
Well, thank you so much for answering all the questions and for guiding us through this process. Perhaps as a way to end, I know we're just over 6, so we can maybe draw the session to a close here. But as a way to end, maybe we can hear from the both of you if you have any, parting remarks, and then we'll close the session. Perhaps Assef first, and then Nahid.
Sure. I mean, I guess I would maybe just reiterate something I said at the outset, and just try to encourage those of you who are on the job market and are searching either for your first job or for something that's a bit more permanent, for something that's a better fit for you. I would just kind of encourage you to stick it out, be persistent, don't give up. Hang in there. I really do think that we need younger people in academia. As I said, we need people from diverse backgrounds in academia. So it is a difficult job market. It is in some ways quite bleak, but it really doesn't help to get discouraged. So be persistent, put your best foot forward. I think be kind. I think that is actually an important thing. You'd be surprised how far it can get you to be kind to other people. And then, yes, I would second what Nahid's suggestion as well. Have a plan B, have a backup plan just in case things don't work out. But hang in there, be persistent, and all the best to those of you who are on the job market.
Yeah, I think Assef just put it really perfectly. And I guess the only thing I would add to that is just think outside the box. If academia is where you would like to be and it's not happening immediately in terms of the best, achieving a postdoc or that tenure track position, just continue doing what you love. And, maybe you can get grants, fellowships, other ways of pursuing that. And if you do something, produce something that's valuable, it will make you a much more desirable candidate for these positions eventually, even if it's 10 years from now. I'm not saying that's how it should be, but I do want to also stay positive while acknowledging the difficulties and the challenges in academia. And I think also to plug into the second point that Assef made, I think it's just really important for all of us to aspire to have a much more collegial and kind academia. And so I suppose my parting words would be, you're in this process, help others even while you're yourself searching, because that you will receive that help back. And if other people reach out to you once you do have a position, be open. And it's a tricky business. There's certain ways of writing a cover letter. If somebody's asking you to share your cover letter with them, you could, taking out the parts that are particular to your own research, you could take those substantive sort of parts out that are just your work, but share with them the format of the cover letter and what needs to go into it. I think generally we need to work toward a more sort of, kind academia, like Assef also said.
Seriously, such beautiful words, and thank you too for being so kind to sharing your experience and your expertise in this process. It's a grueling process for sure, but we have your back. I mean, you have our backs, and we got this, right? So with this, we wanted to thank you, the audience members, for joining us. This was, I believe, our 4th presidential session. I am not sure if we're going to have another one by the end of the year, but next year, another student rep will take my place. Rowena and the next person will carry the torch, and we'll see you with more AIS presidential sessions directly related to what students in Iranian studies fields look for. Thank you again so much, and have a great rest of
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
And thank you, Leila. Thank you,
for
Leila.
organizing. Thank you.
Good luck.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.